Chapter 36. Passing Days. 2 years later. Summer. The forest was beautiful and alive at this time of the year. The bright and vibrant colors of the plant life were richly and deeply accentuated by the golden glow of the steadily setting sun that peeked through the canopy. A gentle breeze washed between the many lush branches, making them rustle and sway ever so slightly. Birds sang their final songs for the evening in the treetops, and on the forest floor, a lone red fox prowled amongst the shrubs. His eyes hungrily locked onto some unseen prey that shifted in the underbrush. Meanwhile, up in the branches and obscured by leaves, a single brown-furred squirrel was taking shelter from the fox on his perch. His ears swiveled on his head, listening carefully for predators or anything else that may pose a threat. He heard the fox stalking around down below, and knew he'd be better off staying in place for now. His tiny stomach had other ideas, though, and growled incessantly at him, reminding him that he hadn't eaten anywhere near enough in the last few days. His paws weakly held themselves over his belly. He couldn't remain here for very long, he knew. He had to go and find some food, and quickly. He cautiously peered over the edge of the tree, hoping against all hope that the fox had gone away. Sadly, it was still down there, its attention on something moving in a bush. All the same, it was way too close to the tree the squirrel hid in. There was no way he could safely sneak by right now. So, resigned to his fate, the squirrel settled down and held still, hoping to rest his aching muscles and praying that the fox would leave soon. He was startled from his rest when something moved and skittered along the wood in front of him. His eyes snapped open and he looked up, ready to flee from whatever creature had stumbled upon him. What he saw was, however, confusing, and he tilted his head. There was another squirrel there, one with black fur and blue eyes, looking back at him. The look on its face was strange as well, as the corners of its lips were turned up. The two remained utterly still for several seconds, just watching each other. Then the newcomer inched forwards, reached up into his mouth, and pulled a large peanut out of his cheek. He rubbed at it with his paw a few times, clearing away his saliva, and then held it out to the brown squirrel. More than a little confused, the brown squirrel inched forwards and sniffed at the offered peanut. It smelled a little different than he was used to somehow. It wasn't like the wild peanuts he knew, but the grumbling of his stomach left no room for skepticism or complaint. He eagerly took the peanut right out of the paws of the black squirrel and began to nibble on it with great enthusiasm. With his hunger fading away for the time being, the brown squirrel allowed himself to relax. But all the while, he kept a close eye trained on the black one. It didn't make any sense to him. Why had the squirrel just given him a peanut? Surely the black squirrel needed to eat too? Before the brown squirrel's simple mind could process things any further, a voice rang through the air from some ways away.
"Phoebe, it's getting dark. Time to come inside."
The loud noise startled the fox down below, and it turned on its paws and scurried off, disappearing deeper into the shrubbery of the woods. The black squirrel looked off towards the voice and sagged in disappointment. He then shot the brown squirrel another one of those strange, upturned lip looks. With that, he curled his form and then sprang off of the branch. The brown squirrel watched him with wide eyes as he sailed a few feet into the air and then suddenly exploded in a swiftly expanding sphere of green flames. The flames vanished as quickly as they had come, and an almost 3-year-old baby emerged from the embers. His wings buzzed on his back, and a large, pleased smile adorned his face as he flew back for his home. He looked over his shoulder at the brown squirrel as he went and gave him a wink before disappearing among the trees. The squirrel watched him go, completely dumbstruck and unsure of what had just happened. After a few minutes of stunned silence, he looked down and saw that the fox had gone and not yet returned. Now was his chance. He stuffed what was left of the gift peanut into his mouth and scurried down the tree to find somewhere safe to rest and eat. Only a minute later, Bibi came flying over the fence and into the backyard of his home. He could see that Eventide was waiting for him by the sliding glass door, his arms crossed over his chest. He was dressed in a blue t-shirt and cargo shorts, ideal for the warm weather. His face lit up when he spotted Bibi coming over the fence, and he took a few steps forward. "There you are! Took you a while, didn't it?" he called out with a wave.
"Sorry, Dad."
Bibi apologized before coming in for a gentle landing. His hooves touched down into the grass, and he breathed out a thankful sigh for the reprieve. He took a moment to catch his breath before looking up into Eventide's eyes.
"How is giving a squirrel a peanut?"
Eventide cocked his head to one side at that. He then let out a merry chuckle of amusement. "Of course you were," he mumbled with a shake of his head before studying Bibi for a moment. The bug had grown quite considerably since his first birthday. Back then, he'd barely come up to Eventide's ankles. Now, though, he was almost all the way up to the bottom of his knees, if he stretched himself out a bit. His horn had grown several inches, and was actually more of a horn and less of a stump. His wings had also gotten significantly larger, a necessity to keep him in the air whenever he decided to fly. Eventide frowned slightly when he spotted the straight crease that ran across his right wing. His mind briefly wandered back to the day Bibi had shed his larval skin, and how that wing had gotten trapped and folded in the process. He had hoped that the mark would go away, but as Bibi had grown, the mark remained clearly visible, and had only gotten more so if they were being honest. He was still skinny as well, even by Fluttershy's most generous estimates. Eventide found himself thinking back on Bibi's hampered physicality when he noted that he was still noticeably out of breath from the exertion of maintaining a transformation, and the distance he had flown to come back. Bibi's muzzle scrunched up slightly at his father's intense gaze, and his ears drooped a little.
"Hey, why are you looking at me like that? Why are you worried all of a sudden?"
he questioned, noting the dimly colored glow surrounding Eventide. Seemingly taken aback by Bibi's observation, he shook himself and gave a warm smile. Sorry, Bee. You're just out of breath, that's all. You didn't overwork yourself, did you?" he asked plainly, while turning to open the sliding glass door that would take them into the kitchen. Bibi let out another breath and shook his head.
"Nah, I'm a little tired, but I'm good,"
he assured happily before trotting up and falling into step by Eventide's side. They entered the home and closed the door behind them without another word. As it clicked shut, a certain golden retriever must have heard his hooves, for she came bounding out of the living room where she had been resting. Her eyes glued onto Bibi, and the air around her became filled with sunny yellow and bright pink light. Bibi braced himself and burst into a fit of laughs when the dog all but tackled him, knocking him onto his back and sniffing him all over. Bibi was quick to return the affections, reaching out with his hooves and giving Buddha pets and pats wherever he could.
"Hey, Buddha, did you miss me?"
he asked between his chuckles.
"I knew you missed me. Good girl."
As Bibi spoke, his hooves began to explore a little bit more, trying to find one very specific spot on her neck. If there hadn't been a wall of fur in his face, Bibi might have stuck out his tongue in concentration. Then he found it, and he began to scratch. The moment he did, Buddha's mouth fell open and her tongue lolled out. She quickly leaned into the ministrations and soon just fell off to one side, freeing Bibi from his pinned position. He took advantage of his newfound freedom to haul himself up to Buddha's side, repeatedly scratching her on and around that oh-so-sweet spot.
"Hee, I got you, girl,"
he chanted as he worked.
"You like that, don't you?" "That's right, yes you do. Who's a good girl? It's you."
From the sidelines, Eventide just watched them, a small, charmed smile adorning his features. BB glanced up at him out of the corner of his eye every so often, taking note of the excess pink light that Eventide was radiating. Grinning to himself, BB opened his mouth a little and pulled some of the love down his throat to warm up his belly. Eventually, though, Eventide let out a relaxed breath and began to head for the living room. "I'm gonna watch some TV. Wanna join me?" he called over his shoulder as he disappeared through the archway. BB, using Buddha's side as a launch pad, scampered after Eventide with a loud and energetic, "Yeah!" He quickly hopped up in Eventide's lap just as the man was sitting down on the couch, driving him a little deeper into the cushions. With his spot claimed, BB did one spin, then two, and then settled down in Eventide's lap, with his eyes glued onto the television and his chin on his father's knee. Buddha soon to join them, taking a place at their side and resting against Eventide's shoulder. Every so often, Eventide or BB would reach over and give her a pet or scratch, but for the time being, they were happy to just sit there and be together. This right here. This was BB's favorite part of the routine they had been running for a long time now. Eventide would get up in the morning, wake BB for breakfast, which, let's be honest, was really just a prolonged hugging session, and then he'd head out for work for a while. In those hours, BB was not allowed to leave the house. Boring as that stretch of time was, he was usually able to keep himself busy. Usually. The books that Fluttershy had gotten for him on his first birthday were frequently revisited, although his collection had expanded, and there was now an entire bookcase in his basement bedroom that stored all of his favorite stories. Everything from children's fantasy, and drama, and sci-fi novels, to something as simple and basic as Pete the Big Green Dragon lined those shelves. Sharing the space were several knickknacks and baubles that Eventide had gotten for BB as time went by. Speaking of time, BB had gotten significantly better at magic since they moved here. Not only could he now shapeshift into a wider range of forms for almost half an hour, but he could also make some relatively competent use of his abilities of telekinesis. He didn't exactly have the fine control needed for anything strenuous or time-consuming, so this thing called video games was sadly beyond him. But he could flick switches, push buttons, and other basic manipulations with little to no trouble whatsoever. And all in all, they were happy. Mostly. BB didn't know the name of the show on the television right now, but it looked like it was an older one. The main character was a high school student who had weird supernatural powers or something. BB might have really gotten invested into the wacky adventures and hijinks that the kid got into, if it weren't for one very specific element of what he was seeing on the screen. The kid's friends. There were several of them, and they all talked and laughed and had fun between the moments of intensity and action. They told jokes, they played games, they helped each other with any number of problems. There were wholesome moments where they talked about something of deep significance, and emotional ones where one had experienced some sort of loss and the others would come and try and cheer them up. They were there for each other. Seeing them laughing on the screen over some clever remark the leader of the group had made, BB couldn't help but deflate a little. Friends. He didn't have any. He had his father. He had Aunt Fluttershy, though she wasn't exactly able to come by very often anymore. And he had Buddha, who was like a big sister to him, but that was it. The wild animals he frequently interacted with in the forest were cute, yes, but none of them could talk back at him, and most of them either ran away from him or made him leave them alone. And none of them were his friends. To them, he was just another creature in the forest. Whenever Eventide left for work, BB was more or less alone for hours and hours on end. Buddha was fun to be around and play with, yes, but she couldn't talk back to him. He couldn't have a meaningful conversation with her about his favorite toys or the cool plot twist in the book he was reading, and he knew he'd tried. The simple truth was, he felt lonely. A fact that he did not want to admit.
Why should I be lonely?
He thought bitterly to himself, his expression turning into a frown.
I'm sitting in my dad's lap right now. I'm not alone.
But those thoughts, sadly, did little and less to ease his feelings. No matter how little sense it made to him, he was lonely. With a quiet hum of melancholy, Bibi cuddled a little deeper in Eventide's lap, hoping that his warmth and love would stave off the grim thoughts in his mind. Thankfully, when Eventide reached down to lightly scratch at the base of his head fin, Bibi was able to relax and put his troubles aside, at least for now. Eventually, Bibi closed his eyes and fell into a light sleep, surrounded by the warmth of his family.